The road was quiet, too quiet for a place that had seen so much movement just hours before. A thin layer of dust still hung in the cold morning air, drifting slowly over broken branches and churned earth. Somewhere in the distance, an engine rumbled, low and heavy, like a storm approaching. You can almost feel the tension pressing down on the ground itself.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Then, from behind a line of trees, the unmistakable silhouette of German Panthers began to emerge. Long barrels, sloped armor, confident, unstoppable. They moved like predators that had never been challenged, and why would they be? Against them, most Allied tanks didn't stand a chance. But hidden in the shadows, waiting, silent and fast, something unexpected was about to change everything. It was early September 1944, near the dense forests and rolling farmland of eastern France, not far from the Moselle River. The war in Europe had entered a new phase. After the breakout from Normandy in August, Allied forces were pushing fast across France, trying to keep the momentum before German defenses could regroup. Speed was everything. The U.S. Army needed units that could move quickly, strike hard, and disappear before the enemy could react. That's where the M18 Hellcat came in. The M18 Hellcat wasn't what most soldiers imagined when they thought of a tank. It had thin armor, barely enough to stop small arms fire. Its turret was open at the top, exposing the crew to the elements and enemy fire. But what it lacked in protection, it made up for in speed. The Hellcat was the fastest armored fighting vehicle of the war, capable of reaching nearly 55 miles per hour on roads. That speed wasn't just a feature, it was its entire philosophy. The Hellcat wasn't built to trade blows, it was built to hunt. The idea behind American tank destroyers had been shaped long before this moment. U.S. Army doctrine, developed in the early years of the war, assumed that German armored forces would attack in large, concentrated formations. To counter that, the Americans created specialized units designed not to fight alongside infantry like traditional tanks, but to respond quickly to breakthroughs and eliminate enemy armor. These units needed mobility above all else. The Hellcat was the purest expression of that idea. Under its light frame, the Hellcat carried a 76mm gun, powerful enough to penetrate German armor when used correctly. But correctly was the key word. The gun alone wasn't enough. The crews had to think differently. They had to move, flank, disappear, and strike again. They had to fight smarter, not harder. Every crewman understood that survival depended on speed and positioning, not armor. In the German ranks, the Panther tank had already earned a reputation. Introduced in 1943, it combined strong armor, a powerful 75mm gun, and excellent mobility. German tank crews trusted it. They knew that in a direct fight, the Panther could outgun and outlast most Allied vehicles. When they heard reports of American tank destroyers, many dismissed them. Thin armor, open tops, these were not machines to fear. At least, that's what they believed. But by late 1944, cracks were beginning to show. German units were no longer operating with the same strength they once had. Fuel shortages were becoming a constant problem. Replacement crews often lacked the experience of earlier veterans. Communication was not always reliable. Still, on the surface, a column of Panthers moving down a road looked as dangerous as ever. On the morning of September 19, 1944, elements of a German armored column were moving cautiously along a narrow road lined with trees and hedgerows. They had learned the hard way that American forces could appear anywhere. Still, the mood among the Panther crews was confident. They had survived weeks of fighting, pushing back against Allied advances, and they believed they still had the upper hand when it came to armored warfare. What they didn't know was that a small unit of U.S. tank destroyers had already taken position nearby. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the U.S. Third Army under General George S. Patton, had been operating aggressively in the region. Among them was a platoon of M18 Hellcats, commanded by young but experienced officers who understood exactly what their machines could and could not do. These men were not new to combat. Many had already seen action during the rapid advance across France after the Normandy breakout. They had faced German anti-tank guns, ambushes, and sudden counterattacks. They had learned quickly, often the hard way. Every encounter shaped how they fought. By the time they reached the Moselle region, they were no longer just following doctrine, they were adapting it. The men of the Hellcat crews had learned quickly. They knew that standing still meant death. They knew that facing a Panther head-on was a mistake. But they also knew something else. The Panther had weaknesses. Its side armor was thinner. Its rear was vulnerable. And in the chaos of movement, even the most powerful tank could be caught off guard. The American platoon commander, a lieutenant whose name would later appear in after-action reports, but never become widely known, had chosen his position carefully. His Hellcats were hidden along a slight rise overlooking the road. The terrain was uneven, covered with trees and patches of brush that broke up their outlines. From a distance, they were almost invisible. He had studied the ground before sunrise, walking parts of it himself, noting where the road narrowed, where the trees were thickest, where the vehicles could move unseen. He understood that this fight would be decided before the first shot was fired. Positioning was everything. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Let the German column come into the kill zone. Wait until the lead tanks passed. Then strike the middle and rear, cutting off any chance of retreat or maneuver. It required timing, discipline, and nerves strong enough to hold fire even as enemy tanks rolled closer and closer. Inside the Hellcats, the crews waited. The engines were idling quietly. The gunners had their sights fixed on the road. The loaders held shells ready, hands steady despite the tension. You can almost hear the soft clink of metal, the faint hum of the engine, the distant crunch of tracks on dirt growing louder with every second. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds felt longer. Every man inside those vehicles knew that once the shooting started, everything would move fast. There would be no time to think, only to act. Then the first Panther appeared in full view. It moved slowly, its turret scanning from side to side. Behind it came another, and then another. 9 in total, spaced along the road, their dark shapes cutting through the morning light. They looked unstoppable, like a steel river flowing forward. The lieutenant gave no order yet. The Panthers continued forward, unaware. They passed the first hidden Hellcat, then the second. The American crews held their breath. One wrong move, one premature shot, and the entire plan would collapse. When the fourth Panther reached the center of the kill zone, the lieutenant finally gave the signal. The silence shattered. The first Hellcat fired, its 76-millimeter gun cracking through the air. The shells slammed into the side of a Panther, punching through its armor. A split second later, a second shot followed from another Hellcat, hitting the rear of a different tank. Flames burst from the engine compartment. Black smoke rising instantly. The German column froze for a moment, caught between confusion and shock. They had expected resistance, but not this, not from hidden positions, not with such precision. Then the Hellcats moved. This was the part that made them deadly. They didn't stay in place to exchange fire. As soon as they fired, they shifted positions, using their speed to relocate before the Panthers could respond. One Hellcat rolled forward to a new firing angle, while another reversed behind cover, reappearing moments later from a different direction. The Panthers tried to react. Their turrets swung toward the flashes of gunfire. One fired blindly into the trees, its shell tearing through branches but hitting nothing. Another attempted to turn its hull, trying to bring its frontal armor toward the threat. But the road was narrow, and the column was packed tightly. Movement was limited. A third Hellcat fired, striking another Panther in the side. The impact sent sparks and debris flying. The tank lurched, then stopped, smoke pouring from its hull. Inside the German tanks, orders were shouted, engines revved, and commanders tried to regain control. But the situation was slipping away from them. They couldn't see a clear enemy. The shots were coming from different directions, fast and accurate. It felt like they were surrounded by something they couldn't pin down. The American crews kept the pressure. They worked as a coordinated unit, each Hellcat supporting the others. One would fire, drawing attention, while another moved into position for a better shot. Their speed allowed them to dictate the fight, turning the Panthers' strength into a weakness. Within minutes, 3 Panthers were burning. The road was now blocked, the lead tanks unable to move forward, the rear unable to retreat. The column had become a trap. The lieutenant adjusted his plan on the fly. He ordered one Hellcat to swing wide along the flank, using a small dirt path that ran parallel to the road. The driver pushed the engine hard, the vehicle bouncing over rough ground, branches scraping against the hull. It was risky, but it would give them a new angle. As the Hellcat emerged on the side of the German column, its gunner lined up a shot at another Panther's rear. He fired. The shell hit squarely, igniting the tank almost instantly. Now the German crews were no longer confident. The idea that these lightly armored American vehicles were destroying Panthers one after another was something they had never truly believed possible. The laughter, the dismissive attitude, they were gone. What replaced it was urgency. One Panther finally managed to bring its gun to bear on a Hellcat that had lingered a moment too long. It fired. The shell struck the ground just short, sending dirt and debris into the air. The Hellcat reversed immediately, disappearing behind cover before a second shot could be taken. The American crews knew they couldn't afford mistakes. One direct hit from a Panther would be enough to destroy them. Their survival depended on constant movement, constant awareness. Another shot rang out from a Hellcat positioned slightly uphill. The shell struck a Panther's turret ring, jamming it. The tank was now unable to rotate its gun effectively. Moments later, a follow-up shot finished it. 5 Panthers were now out of action. The remaining German tanks attempted to break free. One tried to push forward, forcing its way past the wreckage. But as it moved, it exposed its side. A Hellcat took the opportunity, firing and hitting just behind the turret. The tank shuddered and came to a stop. 6. The fight was turning into something the German crews had never anticipated, a controlled ambush executed with precision and speed. The sounds of the battlefield filled the air, the crack of gunfire, the roar of engines, the metallic clang of impacts. Smoke hung thick, mixing with the smell of burning fuel. You can almost taste it, feel it in your lungs. The lieutenant stayed calm, constantly scanning through binoculars, adjusting positions with hand signals and radio calls. His voice remained steady, even as the battle intensified. Leadership in moments like this wasn't about shouting orders. It was about clarity and control. Another Hellcat shifted position again, using a shallow ditch for cover. Its gunner waited for a clear shot. When one of the Panthers tried to reverse, exposing its rear, he fired. The shell hit, and the tank erupted in flames. 7. The German column was now in chaos. Communication between tanks had broken down. Visibility was poor due to smoke and debris. Each crew was fighting its own battle, trying to survive. Some German crew members began abandoning damaged tanks, scrambling out and seeking cover along the roadside. Others stayed inside, hoping to repair or fight back. The once organized column had turned into scattered, isolated machines. The 8th Panther was hit shortly after, this time from a Hellcat that had circled around further than expected. The shot came from an angle the Germans hadn't even considered. The tank's side armor offered little resistance. 8. Only one Panther remained operational. It attempted to retreat, reversing down the road. But the wreckage blocked its path. Its driver tried to maneuver around, but the space was too tight. The tank turned slightly, searching for an escape. The final Hellcat took its position. The gunner steadied his aim. The distance was short. The target was clear. He fired. The shells struck the Panther's rear, penetrating deeply. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a burst of flame shot out, followed by thick smoke. The tank stopped moving. 9. The ambush was over. The entire engagement had lasted only a few minutes, but its impact was far greater. 9 Panther tanks, machines that had dominated battlefields, had been taken out by a small group of fast, lightly armored tank destroyers. The American crews didn't celebrate immediately. They stayed alert, scanning for any additional threats. Only when they were sure the area was secure did they begin to relax, even slightly. Some of them climbed partially out of the open turrets, looking over the battlefield. What they saw was something few expected. Burning Panthers scattered along the road, smoke rising into the sky, the result of careful planning and execution. They had done what many would have thought impossible. Later reports would describe the action in more formal terms, noting the effectiveness of the ambush, the coordination of the units, and the destruction of enemy armor. But those reports couldn't fully capture what it felt like in those moments. The tension, the speed, the constant movement, the awareness that one mistake could mean death. The encounter became one of many examples that showed how the M18 Hellcat was meant to be used. It wasn't a tank in the traditional sense. It was a hunter relying on speed, positioning, and surprise. Across the Western Front, similar lessons were being learned. Heavy armor alone was not enough. Flexibility, communication, and quick decision-making were becoming just as important. The Hellcat crews represented a shift in thinking, a move toward a more dynamic kind of warfare. For the German crews who survived, the lesson was clear. The battlefield was changing. The enemy they had underestimated was capable of adapting, using different tactics, and turning perceived weaknesses into strengths. You can almost imagine the silence that followed the fight, the smoke slowly clearing, the wrecks of the Panthers still burning, the quiet return after the storm. The Hellcats moved on soon after. They had more ground to cover, more battles ahead. The war wasn't over, but for that moment, on that narrow road in eastern France, they had rewritten the rules of the fight. And somewhere, in the memory of those who witnessed it, the image remained, a group of fast, lightly armored machines, striking with precision, disappearing before the enemy could even understand what had happened. The laughter that once greeted them had been replaced by something else entirely: respect.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.